Hey everybody, what's up? It's Mark again. So where are my red wine lovers at? I'd be willing to bet that you probably drink a lot of Cabernet, Merlot, Malbec, and Pinot Noir, right? But what about Syrah or Shiraz? For some reason, at least here in the United States, it seems like Syrah often gets overlooked. And it sure would be a real shame to miss out on this because this grape makes some of the best red wines in the world. Syrah really seems to confuse a lot of people. So let's learn a little bit about this fantastic wine today so that you can become a savvy Syrah sipper. So the first misunderstanding is where Syrah comes from. More than a few regions of the world have laid claim to this grape, including Iran and Sicily. The stories are all romantic, but few of them are correct. DNA tracing shows us that the Syrah grape actually originates in the warm Mediterranean climates of southeastern France. In particular, the Rhone River Valley, where it makes some of the most valued and cherished red wines in the world. Syrah likes it hot, and on the steep and rocky slopes of the Rhone, you'll find Syrah blowing in the treacherous, parched Mistral winds. With cryptic names like Côte-Rôtie, Saint-Joseph, Hermitage, and Cornat, it's hard to tell what's in a bottle of French Rhone. And this may be why Syrah was slow to be embraced in England and in America. Instead, it was in Australia that Syrah found a home away from home. In the 1830s, a Scotsman by the name of James Busby was commissioned to bring grapevine clippings back from France and Spain to the newly established colonies in Australia. So Busby brought back a red grapevine with him that was labeled Shiraz, which was the anglicized name of this grape, but when pronounced with a heavy Australian accent, sounded more like Shiraz. And the name stuck. So yes, Syrah and Shiraz are both the same grape and the same wine. The hot, dry regions of southeastern Australia were very similar to France's Rhone, and by the 1860s, Shiraz wine was already becoming an important local wine. Eventually, the grape would become the most planted in all of Australia. So why did Syrah never really take off in the United States? My theory is that it never really got a hold in California. Grapes like Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Pinot Noir, and Chardonnay dominated. So we never really got the chance to know Syrah. So now is our chance to get to know Syrah. Let's taste these two wines. For those of you who are not really familiar with Syrah or who have never even tasted it before, there's a couple things you can expect. Syrah wines are usually very intense in color, often with a purple hue. You can expect a bigger, bolder wine with higher alcohol content. They're often described as being jammy, meaning they taste like fruit preserves. Common flavor descriptors are white and black pepper. And interestingly enough, gamey. Old Syrah and Shiraz are often described as having this sort of animal musk or a barnyard quality to them. And I think we're going to be seeing some of that here today. This is a 2017 Saint-Joseph from Guy Farge. And Saint-Joseph is one of the most famous sub-regions within the Rhone River Valley. Like many of the finest wines that are made in the Rhone River Valley, this grows on granite soils, which is where the name Granit comes from. So let's give it a smell and a taste. And as always, we swirl the wine in the glass to aerate it, and that way that intensifies the aromas and the flavors too. It's very herbal. In some ways, it seems more like a food than a wine, and I'm getting a little bit of that muskiness that we were talking about earlier. Syrah is almost always an intensely flavored wine, and one reason is because the berries are really small, which means you get more skin to pulp ratio, and that's more flavor right there. For a 2017, this is a relatively young and vibrant wine, what they call youthful in the wine business, and it's full of fresh, dark fruits, things like blackberries and black cherries, and there's also this tannic quality to it. And another reason for that intensity of flavor for this particular wine is because it's coming from older vines. And older grapevines tend to produce more intensely flavored clusters of grapes. One other thing that you may notice about this Guy Farge Saint-Joseph is that it's a little gritty in the mouth and also kind of cloudy in the glass. And that would be because it's not filtered. Guy Farge, like many French winemakers, is trying to move towards a more sustainable and even organic approach to his winemaking. This is a classic example of a Saint-Joseph from the Rhone Valley. Guy Farge does a beautiful job with this, and it's still very young, and I think could probably last and mature for at least another 10 years. Now this beautiful wine here is from Clarendon Hills. They're in Australia, obviously, near McLaren Vale, south of Adelaide. And this is a 2010, so it's got 10 years of age on it. And this wine is made from what they call dry-grown vines, which means they don't irrigate the grapevines at all, which leads to smaller berries on the vine, which means more skin and also more flavor. And if you look at this part of Australia on a map, you may notice that it's bordered by an ocean on one side and low rolling foothills on the other side. And the climate is, no coincidence, Mediterranean. All right, let's give that a little swirl. Wow, this wine here is starting to show signs of age. We're getting things in here like dried fruits, baking spices, leather and tobacco, and of course that musk that we talked about. Clarendon Hills also ferments these wines with local wild yeasts, which tend to create some of these funky aromas and flavors. This is a huge, intense wine, and at 14.5% alcohol, you're going to notice the body. It's going to feel a lot more rich and lush in your mouth. And of course, we're getting sort of those aged characteristics in here. A lot of baking spices, brown sugar, but I would also describe it as being a meaty wine. It's got sort of that gamey quality to it, almost like meat. There's a savory umami quality to this wine that would make it perfect for pairing up with red meats. This is a beautiful example of what Australian Syrah, Shiraz can do, especially as it starts to get older and you get a lot of that complexity and maturity in the glass. I would say this is at its peak right now and ready to drink. Herbal, savory, meaty. A lot of the terms that we use to describe these wines sound like food, right? So we should talk about food pairings for these wines now, because you're going to get a couple of recipes that come along with this tasting pack. When I'm thinking about this French Syrah from Saint-Joseph, it's herbal, it's fresh, it's vibrant. I think it'll pair up with foods that are spiced, especially exotic spices. And for that reason, I want to pair it up with a Greek moussaka. And we've described our Clarendon Hills Syrah as being savory, meaty, and having some umami qualities to them. And for that reason, I chose to pair this up with an herb-crusted venison steak with marsala mushrooms. So thanks so much for joining me on this weekly tasting. I hope you've learned something about the Syrah grape and wine, home in France and away in Australia. And if you have any questions or thoughts about this tasting or otherwise, the conversation doesn't have to stop here. You can always leave me a comment in the comment section below this video, and I will get back to you. On behalf of Wine Still Sold Out, I'm Marc Supsic. Take care of yourselves. Cheers.